really like to live beside you, baby. I love your body, your spirit, and your clothes. But you see that line that's moving through the station. I told you, I told you, I told you, I was one of those.
The Reichstag opened in 1894 and was the German Capitol building until 1933, when it was destroyed by fire. After the Second World War, the Capitol moved to Bonn, and the building sat unused until it was restored against the elements in the 1960s. It was completely restored and restored as the Parliament buildings and opened for that purpose in 1999.
Now we'll take Berlin.
What better place to start your tour of Berlin than the back gate of the Berlin Zoo? Across the street is Kaiser Wilhelm Memorial Church. They've managed to preserve some of the ornate mosaics, both on the floor and on the walls. We also got to hear the organist do a bit of practicing. The sister church just across the courtyard is an example of post-war German architecture. Then, a quick bus ride past the Victory Tower and through the Tiergarten. And are these people camping, or are they some kind of protester? What's going on here? Do the police need my help? In Bremen, the police were there to serve. In Berlin, it looked like they were here to also serve the people who were taking part in the Berlin Climate March. They'd been going on all week. The CIA may have been filming them, and all that they had for weapons were bubbles. And because there are not enough bubbles in the world, we will now pause for some bubble music. Let's see what's on the other side of the Brandenburg Gate. It looks like more of the climate strike people have come over here. And maybe someone from the Stasi party, I'm not sure. There's the front door of the American Embassy and the fountain in front of it. That leads you next door to the DZ building with their imaginative Frank Gehry sculpture in the lobby. All buildings within sight of the Brandenburg Gate must have plain facades. He found a way around it. The Hotel Adlon right next door is where Michael Jackson dangled his infant son. To say that Berlin has a bit of a checkered history is slightly understating the case. There was Marx and Engels, who you might even meet. The divided Berlin and the DDR, which has its very own museum, and the Second World War. The omnipresent radio tower was the pride of East Berlin. It's everywhere you look. But we'd have to take a closer look at Humboldt University a bit later, because it was time for a night out on the town. The Philharmonie building at number 1 Herbert von Karajan Place is a spectacular building, even when sometimes really strange things happen there and people materialize from out of nowhere. We watched the lights of the Sony Center change as part of the Berlin Light Festival as we contemplated the music we just heard. How did you like it, Mary?
It was absolutely fabulous. The best.
A quick bus ride and we're soon in the Schönberg neighborhood walking by the David Bowie Shrine. We took the advice of the German government website and booked our free tour of the Reichstag Dome well in advance. You got to see some of the gargoyles on the building up close, but you still had to go through security. How was the security coming into the Reichstag today?
Much like airport security. Emptying buckets, showing passports, putting everything in buckets, walking through the scanner. Other than that, oh, wait, I'm getting a message. Gotta go.
From the steps of the Reichstag, you have an absolutely fabulous view over the Grand Lawn. They have both the European Union and the German flag flying there. And of course, off in the distance, a good view of the Victory Tower. And while I was all for jumping down to the next level to see what the view from there was like, Mary insisted it wasn't open to the public and this fellow was part of the security detail. The mirrors allow for some pretty fancy special effect photography, but their real purpose is to reflect natural light into the legislative assembly below. The slats that you see there rotate to allow that to happen while the sun is out, even on cloudy days. The British architect Lord Norman Foster rebuilt the Reichstag in 1995 and it was reopened in 1999. This cupola where we're now standing stands 155 feet above the ground and another 600 feet as you climb to the top for the spectacular views. A quick glance up through the roof before lunch in Tiergarten Park and heading back to check out Humboldt University Plaza again. Marx and Engels were two of Humboldt's more famous graduates. It was also the site of the Nazi book burning, and there's a plaque there dedicated to that infamous event. Mary, meanwhile, was working the room and found the first of her operatives for the day. The palace of Kaiser Wilhelm III was very ornate with some fancy statuary. The servants' entrance looked pretty good too, although musicians would be going up the back stairs and through the kitchen to get to the gig. You walk over the Spree River Bridge and you're on Museum Island. So here we are at the intersection of the sacred and the profane. Right across the Spree River there is the market. And were you inspired to go into the Berliner Dome today? What is inspiring you today? Go into the Kaiser Wilhelm Library, but enjoyed the fountain outside it instead. On the way home, you passed through the Brandenburg Gate S-Bahn station. It's been preserved to look like it did during the Cold War era when it was one of Berlin's abandoned subway stations. The trains would just whistle right through. Then it was a night at the Berlin Festival of Lights where they transformed their buildings through the power of laser light. director feared that he had been recognized on the streets of Berlin, and now that it was safest to travel incognito. A quick meal, a quick tram ride, and we were ready to see the pride of East Berlin. We left the Berlin Festival of Light at the Bode Museum and then wandered through Potsdamer Platz Mall to catch the S train back home. But we had to catch a bus to get to the train station. So did you have to wait a while for a bus last night? So did he. Perhaps he died from some kind of animal attack because the Pergamon Museum seemed to have a Lion King, or was it a Tiger King theme going on? No matter. The Germans were fascinated with archaeology, and it shows. They had relics from all over the Mideast, including some 13th century sphinxes from Hattusa. They had been rebuilt and the originals are back in Turkey. These replicas didn't stop Mary from boning up on her hieroglyphics. Another reproduction they had was the Gates of Ishtar from 6th century Babylon. Then it was time to go upstairs to the Roman part of the museum and examine the gates of Miletus. They guarded the town hall and the Nymphaeum, one of the important town squares. I had a chance to address the masses there. They built things to last in ancient Rome, as this mosaic from a government worker's place shows. The size and scope of their reliefs was just amazing. But enough of Rome. It was really the Mideast that they were fascinated with. The 7th century Turkish hieroglyphics were a bit more of a challenge for me, but I determined that this was a foundation document from the era of King Musa II, outlining their plans for a series of canals and waterworks. While this one was from the era of King Menua, outlining the need to build a Bizababadumi house. They've never really cleared up the meaning of that word. The museum's director, Walter Andre, reconstructed this 13th century BC Assyrian royal palace room. The ornamental friezes in the palace depict the gods, some kneeling, some touching a palm tree, but all with horned crowns. The others outline the accomplishments of King Ashurbanipal II, who reigned in 1883 BC, and of course, some gold. So you're starting to get pretty tired?
Yes.
Yeah, is that a bench down there?
No.
No, in fact, it's the inscribed door socket from the reign of King Shalmaneser I. By then it was lunchtime, and Mary thought she'd like to dine al fresco. So this cafe, are you saying that it's a little bit too fancy for us? Are we going all hobo in Europe now?
I thought we always did.
Although I'm not really sure that it's hoboing when you're having lunch at the Lust Garden. But enough of that, it was time to head to the new museum and see what they're all about. Apparently, they're all about Egypt. Heinrich Schliemann was fascinated with the Homeric tales and set off to prove their veracity. He spent a good deal of his life examining the site of what he thought was ancient Troy. And seeing how it was in the 1890s, he brought some stuff back. The superior hieroglyphic skills that we had picked up at the Pergamon Museum came in handy again. We were able to determine that the states of the Second Intermediate Period of 1794 BC had re-established the traditions and styles of the Middle Kingdom. The kneeling figures were a new development and were seen mainly in private rather than public displays. The baptism of the Frankish king, Clovis I, around the year 500, marks the start of Catholic influence in Europe. The grave markers have both pagan and Christian markings from that point in history. The death mask of Nefertiti had to be photographed from a distance. This was not due to COVID-19 restrictions. And meanwhile, the sarcophagus of Conrad von Bergsthoff showed that he was buried with his neck cross of the Order of St. John. The mammoth was one of the more popular of the extinct European species. This skeleton is from 14,500 years ago. They used the bones to make musical instruments, but not this particular one. The lures represented the highest degree of technology in musical instrument manufacture. They were often made in pairs. I believe that the player is using a jet tone mouthpiece on this one. The golden god was obviously a religious artifact. We weren't quite sure what this one represented. It was then time to leave the new museum. We had a busy day ahead of us. We didn't have time to stand in line like these Polish voters. Checkpoint Charlie had its day, but its day is long gone. What do you do with it after that? The Germans found a use. We didn't stop at the Checkpoint Charlie bar, though, because we had better things to do with our time. They did manage to retain some of the art that had been left on the wall, but not as big a chunk as you could find at Potsdamer Platz. Potsdamer Platz is also home to the Canadian Embassy, spelt with a K in Germany. And is this ICBC? What's the Insurance Corporation of British Columbia doing here? The answer is nothing. The Germans have an alphabet and know how to use it. Is this a miracle? No, but the sax player was working on it. The violin parts were recorded, and the kid's main job was to trick people into thinking he was a virtuoso and get more euros into the hat. But it was time to get to the Jewish Museum. but first a few random buildings and a stop at the garden. We knew we were getting close when we saw the art. And then we saw the old building and the new, and how seriously they take security. Architect Daniel Libeskind designed the Jewish Museum as a series of voids along a zigzag pattern intersected by a straight line. There are three paths: the axis of exile, the axis of the Holocaust, and the axis of continuity. The first void gave me a chance to try some photography effects. Long exposure times because my tripod had to be checked as a potential weapon. The axis of the Holocaust goes upward for 24 meters. The Holocaust Tower is unheated and lit by natural light. Libeskind called this the voided void. The axis of exile leads to the Garden of Exile. 49 columns arranged in a square, the only rectangular form in the building. Libeskind said one feels a bit sick walking through it because it's what perfect order feels like when you leave the history of Berlin. Each column is filled with earth and has a Russian olive tree planted on top to provide shade in the summer. The installation art Fallen Leaves by Manish Kadishman represents the fallen victims of war and violence. We could have gone to the National Gallery, but Queen Mary thought that we should go catch the rest of the new museum. It was not an idle threat. They did have plenty of idols and a sarcophagus or two. Do you think maybe this is haunted with all these mummies here?
Definitely in the realm of the underworld.
Is he getting up, or is he just getting ready to head into one of these tombs? And if you're going to go raid some tombs, why not bring back some idols? Maybe the idol of Isis. Well, enough of that. It was time to head out for the night to the Vivid show at the Palais Berlin. I only had my cell phone with me, so they were kind enough to have some images on their website. After the show, you could snap away with your camera. And people did. Inspired by the show, I got up the next morning and practiced before we went out to
Come out the gallery.
Did you notice that there were very many obese people around here?
There are a number.
Any of them here?
Well, yes, right behind you.
They did have a portrait of a very well-fed German merchant and an extensive collection of 15th century paintings of Hans Mulcher. He had made himself acquainted with the new artistic styles from northern France and the Netherlands and brought them back to Germany. There were statues by Darmstädter, a Venus by Lucas Cranach, and Jungberner's Fountain of Youth, but somehow they paled in comparison to the decadent work of Hieronymus Bosch. There were no barriers, so getting detailed shots of the work was possible. Perhaps there's a guide who could direct us where to get those shots. These ribald pictures were followed up by a room of religious paintings, which are never complete without a crucifixion scene. The panels of Simon Marmion were considerably less macabre and even featured some high-fashion silver slippers snuck into the work. Perhaps one of the priests had bought the young lady the slippers. The next section featured other European religious painters, including Hugo van der Goes, The Cloister at Roodendaal. In this anonymous Dutch crucifixion scene, you'll notice that they have Dutch facial features. Because you could get up close, you could really see the detail. This Armageddon scene had labels so that you could figure out who was who. This next picture really didn't need a label, but they explained that it was not human genitalia you were looking at. Then it was back to religious painting with an Armageddon tripod. There were no barriers as the museum wanted visitors to get a good close-up view of what hell might possibly be awaiting them. There was no mention of COVID, just the usual fires, floods, and pestilence. Pieter Hughes had a much more pleasant view of things, and Pieter Bruegel the Elder set forth his proverbs on life in great detail with a book outlining his message. No museum is complete without a Van Dyck, or two, and a Rubens. In fact, why not a room full of Rubens? That's one way to attract the finest visitors. Joachim Watwiel painted everyday life scenes, but I'm not sure what part of everyday life this is. And Franz Hall's My Babe attracted art students from all over Europe. Who knew? But after a while, they just became more old masters. The bottom hall is dedicated to them. Rooms full of them. It was overwhelming. And if you've seen one Michelangelo, haven't you seen them all? Mary, ever the teacher, thought there was a quiz following and paid the strictest attention. I was ready for the next thing. Well, the next thing. Maybe this hot air balloon can get us out of here. But is there a guide handy to show us which way to go? I'm out of here. Will it be dangerous getting there? Will we have to take any unnecessary risks? Can you try that a bit faster, Don? After that bit of excitement, it was time to check in at the Museum of Arts and Crafts, or as the Germans would say, Kunst und Gewebe, with a little bit of virtual reality. Although I'm not sure that this kind of reality is really part of their art exhibit. It was really a display of African haute couture. Many of the clothes that we send to thrift stores end up being shipped to Africa. You'll notice the jeans incorporated into this dress. That's because they use the leftovers of Western society to creative and practical ends. The traditional woven cloth of Senegal, the Sera Niaju, follows a person from birth to death. At birth to protect from evil spirits, at weddings to ensure success, and as a burial blanket. These ideas were synthesized by the German artist Shanmei Yao with her vagabond dress. Modular clothing, who'd have figured? But it was time to get back to some gold. And silver. Bit more gold with this golden shofar. And of course they have one made of animal tusk as well, from about 1200. There's the chairman. Then it was time for us to look at getting on with the rest of our trip. We had indeed taken Berlin.
They will take